The day Nora Callahan walked into the Silver Spur saloon and told Hector Vane exactly what she thought of him was the day everything in the town of Dusthaven, Texas changed forever, including her own heart. It was the spring of 1882, and Dusthaven sat low and sun-bleached along the edge of the Pecos River like a dog too tired to move out of the heat. The town had maybe 400 souls crammed into its dust-choked streets, a handful of decent buildings, and one very large problem that went by the name of Hector Vane. He was not the sheriff, though he might as well have been. He was not a judge, though he passed sentences freely. He was not a man of God, though he collected his tithe from every business in town with the same grim regularity as a Sunday sermon. He owned the Silver Spur Saloon, the only bank in a 30-mile radius, 3 of the 4 water wells that the town depended on, and a quiet but absolute authority over the men who carried guns on his behalf. Nora Callahan had come to Dusthaven 6 months prior, riding in on a borrowed wagon with a trunk full of medical textbooks, a small leather bag of instruments, and a letter from a doctor in San Antonio who swore she was the most capable person he had ever trained. She was 26 years old, sharp-eyed, with dark auburn hair that she kept pinned up in a practical way that still managed to come loose around her temples by noon every day. She had grown up in St. Louis, educated by a father who believed that a woman's mind was as worth developing as any man's, and she had spent 4 years apprenticed to Dr. Samuel Hart before he passed from a fever and left her his books and his conviction that she had more to give the world than any drawing room could contain. Dusthaven needed a doctor badly. The previous one had drunk himself into an early grave, and the nearest replacement was in Fort Stockton, half a day's hard ride away. When Nora arrived and set up her practice in the spare room of the town's only boarding house, run by a widow named Edna Marsh, people were cautiously grateful. The women came first, then the children, and eventually the men who were too proud to say they needed help but too sick to keep pretending otherwise. She had been warned about Hector Vane on her second day in town, by Edna herself, who sat her down at the kitchen table and spoke in the hushed, careful tone of someone describing a predator that might be listening through the walls. Vane was 51 years old, heavy through the shoulders, with a thick silver mustache and pale gray eyes that reminded people of a winter sky before a storm. He had come to Dusthaven 12 years ago with a saddlebag full of money whose origins no one had been brave enough to question, and he had spent those 12 years systematically buying up every piece of leverage a man could want in a frontier town. He was not violent himself, not usually. He had men for that. But his calm, his absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will, was in many ways more frightening than a drawn gun. 2 men who had openly defied him over the years had left town under circumstances that were spoken about only in whispers. Nora listened to Edna's warning with full attention and then asked a practical question. Did Vane interfere with medical care? Edna said not directly, but he had made it very clear, through intermediaries, that the previous doctor's habit of treating families who were behind on their payments to Vane's bank had not been appreciated. Nora had nodded, thanked her, and gone back to organizing her instruments. She had not gone looking for a confrontation. She had been far too busy. The first months were consumed by a whooping cough outbreak that swept through the younger children of the town, 2 difficult births, a broken leg that had been badly set by a well-meaning neighbor, and the regular business of cuts and fevers, and the kind of slow, grinding ailments that came from hard work in hard country. She charged what people could pay, kept careful records, and earned a reputation in Dusthaven for being both effective and fair. It was the Garza family who finally put her on a collision course with Hector Vane. Miguel and Rosa Garza had a small farm 3 miles south of town, and they had 3 children. A boy of 9 named Tomás, a girl of 7 named Lucia, and a baby barely 6 months old named Eduardo. They were good, quiet people who worked their land with serious dedication, and bought their supplies from the general store on credit when the harvest was lean, as it had been for 2 years running. They owed Vane's bank a sum that had grown with interest into something they could not repay without selling the land itself, which Vane had made clear he would be happy to accept. Rosa Garza came to Nora on a Tuesday morning with Eduardo on her hip, her eyes swollen from crying. The baby had a high fever and a rattling cough that Nora recognized immediately as dangerous. She brought them inside, examined the baby carefully, prepared a medicine from her stores, and told Rosa that Eduardo needed to be kept warm, given fluids, and watched through the night. She said she would come to the farm herself that evening to check on him. Rosa had pressed Nora's hands between both of hers and said, in her careful English, that she was grateful but that she had no money to pay. Nora said she knew that, and it did not matter. Rosa's face had done something complicated then, relief and gratitude tangled up with an older sadness, and she said that Senor Vane had sent a man to the farm that morning. The man had said that if they could not make a payment by the end of the week, Vane would be taking the farm, the house, the livestock, and everything else. Nora had driven out to the Garza farm that evening and found Eduardo slightly improved but still very ill. She stayed for 3 hours, adjusted the treatment, and rode back to town under a sky full of hard white stars, thinking very carefully about Hector Vane. By the time she arrived at Dusthaven the following morning, she had made up her mind. She walked into the Silver Spur saloon at 10 o'clock, when the place was quiet and the barkeep was still wiping down glasses from the night before. Vane was at his usual table in the back corner, going through ledgers with a thin, precise-looking man who served as his bookkeeper. 2 of his men, broad-shouldered and blank-eyed, stood near the bar. The barkeep looked up when Nora came in and his face went through several rapid calculations. Nora walked straight to Vane's table and stopped in front of it. Vane looked up slowly, in the way of a man who was used to people approaching him with something to ask rather than something to say. "Miss Callahan," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried. "This is not a place for a woman at this hour." "It is exactly the place I need to be," Nora said. "I want to discuss the Garza family." Something shifted behind Vane's pale eyes, but his expression did not change. He closed his ledger with a soft, deliberate sound. "I have a business arrangement with the Garza family. That is not your concern." "A baby is sick in that house," Nora said. "A baby who has a fighting chance if his parents are not driven to ruin and desperation in the middle of his illness. That makes it my concern. Sentiment is a luxury, Miss Callahan. Debt is a fact. So is the fact that you have been charging compound interest on a loan that was made at a flat rate, which is not what was agreed to and which I believe is not what any honest court would uphold." The room was very quiet. The barkeep had stopped wiping his glasses. The bookkeeper was looking at the wall. Vane leaned back in his chair and studied her with those gray winter eyes. "You have been looking into things that do not concern you." "I have been listening to people who have been too frightened to speak up for themselves," Nora said. "The Garzas are not the only ones. There are 4 other families in this town who are in the same position. You are squeezing people who have nowhere else to go, and you are doing it because you can and because no one has told you plainly that it is wrong." She heard something then behind her and to her left, a sound she could not quite identify, and then a voice, low and steady, carrying across the quiet room like a stone dropped into still water. "She speaks for me too." Nora turned. She had seen him before, in the way that you see people in a small town without really seeing them. He had been in Dusthaven for 2 weeks, staying at the boarding house, and Edna had mentioned that he was a cattle drover looking for work. He was tall, lean through the middle but broad through the chest, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that was perpetually somewhere between shaved and not. He was maybe 30, 31. He wore a dusty gray coat over a plain shirt, and he had the particular stillness of a man who had spent years in open country where staying calm was a survival skill. His name was Cole Briggs, and Nora had spoken to him exactly twice, once when he held the boarding house door open for her, and once when she had patched a cut on his forearm that he had gotten from a piece of broken fence. He had been polite and quiet both times, and she had thought nothing more of him than that. But now he was standing in the Silver Spur saloon at 10 in the morning, and he had just said 4 words that made Hector Vane's pale eyes go flat and cold. "And who in the hell are you?" Vane said. "Cole Briggs," he said. "I've been in this town 2 weeks, long enough to hear what everyone's afraid to say out loud. This woman is the only one with the nerve to say it, and she's right." Nora watched Vane look at Cole the way a man looks at an obstacle that has appeared in an otherwise clear road. He looked at the 2 men near the bar. They looked back at him. "You are a stranger here, Mr. Briggs," Vane said. "I would think very carefully before making enemies in a town where you have none to help you." "I have one," Cole said, and he glanced at Nora with something in his expression that was not quite a smile but was close to it. Nora felt something she could not account for, a small, unexpected warmth that she attributed to adrenaline and pushed aside. "The Garza's debt," Nora said, turning back to Vane and keeping her voice level, "should be calculated at the original agreed rate, which would put their balance at a figure they can repay over the next 2 years if you give them the time. I am asking you to do that. I am asking publicly in front of witnesses so that there is a record of this conversation." Vane was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that had a temperature. "You are asking me," he said finally, "to renegotiate a private financial matter because a baby has a cough." "I am asking you to honor the terms of the original agreement," Nora said, "and I am asking you to extend that same fairness to the other families in this town who are in similar circumstances. Because what you are doing is not business. It is extraction, and the people of this town know it, even if they have been too afraid to say it until now." She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, which she placed on the table in front of him. It was a letter she had written that morning, addressed to the district land office in San Antonio, laying out the specific terms of the Garza loan as Rosa had described them and asking for a formal review. She had not yet sent it. "That is a copy of a letter that will go to San Antonio unless this matter is resolved fairly," she said. "I am not trying to ruin you, Mr. Vane. I am asking for decency." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. It felt like a very long time. Then Vane picked up the letter, looked at it, and set it down again. "Get out of my saloon," he said, not loudly, not with heat, in the voice of a man who was recalculating. Nora picked up the letter, turned, and walked out. Cole Briggs walked out behind her. Outside, in the bright, brutal sunshine of a Texas spring morning, Nora stood on the plank sidewalk and breathed carefully for a moment. Her hands were not shaking, which surprised her a little. She had expected them to shake. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Cole said, coming to stand beside her. "Probably both," she said. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a moment the whole loud business of the town went on around them as though they were in a pocket of stillness. "Why did you say that?" she asked. "In there you don't know me." "I know enough," he said. "You know almost nothing about me." "I know you went in there alone to fight for a family that can't fight for themselves," he said. "That tells me quite a lot." Nora did not know what to say to that. She was a woman who generally knew what to say. "I should go check on my patient," she said. "Of course," he said. And then, before she could walk away, "Miss Callahan, be careful. Men like Vane don't fold on the first push." "I know that," she said. "I know you know it," he said. "I just wanted to say it." She looked at him for another moment, this quiet, unreadable man who had walked into a room full of danger for a reason she still could not fully account for. Then she nodded and walked toward her horse. She thought about him the whole ride to the Garza farm, which irritated her considerably. Eduardo Garza was better by the end of the week. His fever broke on the 4th day, and by the 6th he was nursing well and sleeping with the small, absolute peace of a baby who has come back from the edge of something frightening. Rosa cried when Nora told her he was going to be fine, and Miguel stood in the doorway of their small adobe house with his hat in his hands and could not speak at all for a moment. The news from Hector Vane came the following Monday, delivered by his bookkeeper in a stiff, formal note. The Garza loan would be recalculated at the original agreed rate. The families of Hendricks, Bauer, Morales, and Petty would receive similar adjustments. There was no apology in the note and no warmth, but there was compliance, and that was what Nora had asked for. She read the note twice, standing at the window of her small room at the boarding house, looking out at the street below. She felt something quietly fierce inside her chest, like a fire that had found good fuel. Edna Marsh, who had somehow already heard about the saloon confrontation despite not having been anywhere near it, came to Nora's door that evening with a plate of food and an expression of mingled admiration and terror. "You walked in there and said that," Edna said, "to his face." "Someone had to," Nora said. "People have been thinking that for 12 years, Edna said. "No one ever did it." "Well," Nora said, she was not sure what else to add. "That man who spoke up for you," Edna said, in a tone that was trying very hard to sound casual. "Cole Briggs, he's a good man. Quiet but good." Nora took the plate of food and thanked her and moved the conversation along. But that night, lying in the dark with the sound of the river distant and the stars very bright through her thin curtain, she found herself thinking about the moment he had spoken. She had been standing there alone in front of Hector Vane, feeling the full weight of being the only person in the room who was going to say what needed saying, and then she had heard that voice behind her, low and steady. "She speaks for me too." And something in her, something she had not known was bracing itself, had relaxed by about half a degree. She told herself it was simply gratitude for an ally. Cole Briggs came to her practice the next Thursday with a horse that had thrown him, and a left shoulder that had taken the impact badly. He had ridden in from a small cattle operation 15 miles north, where he had picked up 2 weeks of work, and he was dusty and tired, and holding his arm at the careful angle of someone who has decided not to think about how much it hurts. Nora examined the shoulder, determined it was not broken, and told him he had a separation of the joint that was going to be sore for 2 weeks and should be rested. "Can't rest it," he said. "I'm working." "You'll rest it or you'll hurt it worse," she said. She was doing the thing she always did when she was focused, which was speak clearly and without decoration and expect to be listened to. Most patients listened. Some did not. She watched him consider it. 2 weeks is a long time," he said. "It is," she agreed. "But it is shorter than the rest of your life with a shoulder that doesn't work right." He looked at her. She looked back at him steadily. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She wrapped the shoulder in a clean bandage, showed him how to support the arm, and gave him a small bottle of liniment. He paid her the quarter she asked for and did not argue about the price. "How are the Garzas?" he asked, when she was writing in her record book. She looked up, surprised. "You know them." "I've seen their farm," he said. "Passed by it on the road. Good land, good fence line, they take care of it." "They do," she said. "Eduardo is recovering well. Rosa sent me a jar of preserved figs yesterday, which I suspect represents a significant portion of their stores." "Good people," he said. "Very good people," she agreed. He picked up his hat from the table where he had set it when he came in, turned it once in his hands. She noticed he had a habit of doing that, turning the hat slowly when he was thinking something through. "I'm sorry I wasn't more useful in there," he said. "In the saloon, I should have said more." "You said exactly the right amount," she said. "You said what was needed at the moment it was needed." He looked at her with those dark, quiet eyes, and something passed across his face that she couldn't quite catch before he put his hat back on. "I'll come by in a week to have that shoulder looked at," he said. "Please do," she said. He did. He came back in exactly 1 week, on a Thursday, because she had said Thursday, and she found she had noticed that he was not in the boarding house dining room on Wednesday evening, and had wondered in a passing way whether he had gone. The shoulder was healing well. She examined it, was satisfied, told him so. "You can use it lightly," she said. "Don't haul anything heavy for another week." "I hear you," he said. "You have good color," she said, and then felt the words come out slightly strange, so she added, "You were very pale when you came in last week." "Pain does that," he said, with a hint of something that might have been humor. "It does," she agreed. There was a pause in which neither of them seemed quite ready to conclude the appointment. "Have you eaten?" he said. It's about noon. She looked at the window, surprised by the light. I suppose it is. There's a decent place on the corner, I've been told, he said, if you've got time. She thought about the two patients she expected that afternoon, neither of whom had given her a specific time. She thought about the professional propriety of having lunch with a patient. She thought about the fact that she had been in Dusthaven for 6 months and had not once had a meal with another adult that was purely companionable rather than functional. I have time, she said. The restaurant on the corner was run by a woman named Bet Hayward, who made a beef stew that was genuinely remarkable and kept her tables clean and her coffee strong. Nora and Cole sat across from each other in the small, bright room and talked. He was from Colorado originally, he told her, from a ranch outside Pueblo where his family had worked cattle for 2 generations. His father had died when he was 17. His mother had remarried and moved to Kansas with her new husband when Cole was 19, and he had spent the following 11 years moving from job to job across Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, taking work where he could find it and not staying anywhere long enough to become attached. He said that last part in a matter-of-fact way without self-pity, but Nora heard something underneath it, a life that had never quite had a place to land. What made you stop in Dusthaven? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, cutting his bread. The lady who runs the boarding house makes very good biscuits, he said. Nora laughed. It came out before she could do anything sensible about it, and it surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. He looked at her when she laughed, and his face did a thing she had not seen it do before. It opened up, became younger and warmer, and he smiled at her with his whole face rather than just the corner of his mouth. She told him about herself. St. Louis, her father's study full of books, the years with Dr. Hart, the decision to come west because the west was where the need was greatest. She told him about the whooping cough outbreak in her first month and how she had slept 3 hours a night for 2 weeks and had felt at the end of it more useful than she had ever felt in her life. He listened the way careful people listen, without interrupting, with his full attention. "You're not what I expected," he said when she finished. "What did you expect?" He thought about it. "I'm not sure. Someone older, maybe. Most of the doctors I've met have been older." "Most of the doctors anyone meets are men," she said with a dry precision, "which is a waste, given that roughly half of all the patients in the world are women." "I expect that's true," he said without flinching. She liked that. The absence of the reflexive defensiveness she sometimes met in men when she said something like that, the need to argue or qualify. He just agreed with her easily because it was obviously correct. They sat at that table for an hour and a half. When they finally left, Bet Hayward watched them go with the small, pleased expression of a woman who knows something before the people involved do. The days that followed had a new quality to them that Nora did not examine too closely, because she was afraid of what she might find. Cole stayed in Dusthaven rather than taking the next job that came up, explaining to no one in particular that his shoulder needed another week. He helped at the livery stable for a few days, fixed some fencing for a widow named Mrs. Caraway, and could generally be found somewhere useful when he was not sitting on the front porch of the boarding house in the late evening with a cup of coffee. Nora's day usually ended around 7, when the light was going golden and the heat had dropped to something survivable. She had developed a habit of sitting on the same porch for a while before going in, because the air outside was better than the air in her small room. This habit coincided, she noted, with the habit Cole had already established. They sat at opposite ends of the porch's 2 chairs, with the wide street before them, and talked, or were quiet, in roughly equal measure. It was during one of these evenings that he told her about the winter of his 23rd year, when he had been pushing cattle through a pass in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and the storm had come up fast, and he had been lost for 2 days in snow, so deep it had come to the horse's belly. He told the story quietly, without drama, describing the particular quality of cold that gets into the bones, and the way the mountains had looked when the storm finally broke, and the light came back, all white and silver and enormous. "I thought I was going to die there," he said, "genuinely thought so, and the thing I remember most is thinking that there were things I had not done, not seen, not said." Nora looked at him in the golden evening light. "What things?" He turned his hat in his hands. "Different things than I'm thinking now," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "And what are you thinking now?" He looked at her directly, which was something he did not always do. He was more often looking at the middle distance or at his hands. But when he looked at you, you had the full weight of it, the complete, undivided attention of a person who was actually present. "That it matters where you land," he said. They sat with that for a while. A dog crossed the street below them. Someone was playing a fiddle somewhere deeper in town, something slow and a little sad, the way fiddle music often was out here where the distances were so long. "I sent the letter to San Antonio," Nora said eventually. "The formal complaint about Vane's practices, even after he adjusted the loans, because if no one makes a formal record, he will simply do it again to different people." Cole nodded. "That was the right thing." "He is not going to like it," she said. "No," Cole agreed. "He is not." "You do not have to involve yourself in that," she said. "Whatever trouble comes from it is mine to manage." "I know that," he said. "I also know that I'm not the kind of man to stand on the side of the road while someone walks into a ditch I can see clearly." She looked at him. The last light was going out of the sky, leaving the deep blue that comes just before dark. "Why did you follow me into that saloon?" she asked. "The real reason. You didn't know me." He was quiet for longer than usual. "I had been watching you for 2 weeks," he said. "Not in a way that would concern you. But I'd seen you come and go on your rounds, seen the way people looked at you when you left their doors, the relief on their faces. And then I saw you walk into the Silver Spur at 10 in the morning with your chin up and that letter in your pocket, and I thought, whatever is about to happen in there, I don't want that woman to face it alone." Nora's throat did something unexpected. She pressed her lips together for a moment. "That is a very generous reason," she said carefully. "It was purely selfish," he said. "I would have been able to think of nothing else all day if I'd let you go in alone." She laughed again, the real laugh, the one she hadn't been able to stop before. And again, his face did that thing, opened up, became warmer, became younger. "Cole Briggs," she said, "you are not what I expected either." He smiled at her, and the fiddle played on somewhere in the dark town, and the stars came out over Dusthaven like they did every night, dense and indifferent and beautiful. She knew by then that she was in trouble. The trouble with knowing you are falling in love when you are a practical woman is that you cannot unknow it. It sits in you like a splinter you have found but cannot reach, present and specific and impossible to ignore. Nora went through the following week with full attention to her work and a persistent, warm, slightly inconvenient awareness that Cole Briggs was in the world and in the same town as her. She examined a farmer's infected hand. She delivered news to a woman that a lump she had found was not cancer, watched the relief break across her face like water. She said a boy's broken collarbone, and explained to his mother that it would heal faster than anyone would expect because young bones had a remarkable appetite for knitting themselves back together. She did all of this with her full competence and her full heart, which was what she always gave to her work. And in the evenings she sat on the porch, and Cole was there. He had taken a more regular job, helping the blacksmith who was getting on in years and whose apprentice had left for Fort Worth. It suited him. He came back in the evenings with soot on his hands and forearms, and a quiet satisfaction about him that Nora recognized as the feeling of work done well. He was good with the horses, the blacksmith told anyone who would listen, and good with the other aspects of the trade too, precise and patient, willing to learn. 10 days after their lunch at Bet Hayward's restaurant, on a warm evening in late April, Nora finished writing in her record book and went out to the porch to find Cole already there and a new jar of wildflowers sitting on the small table between the 2 chairs. She stopped when she saw them. "Edna put those there," Cole said immediately. He was looking at the street. Nora looked at the flowers, which were a cheerful mix of bluebonnets and something yellow she couldn't immediately identify. "Did she?" Nora said. "She said the porch needed color," he said. Nora sat down. There was a pause. "She is a very subtle woman," Nora said. "Incredibly subtle," Cole agreed. Another pause. The flowers sat between them, being quite obviously flowers. "They're from the creek bed, I think," Cole said after a moment. "I saw some like that this morning." "You were at the creek bed this morning?" "I took the long way into the smithy." She looked at him. He was studying the street with great attention. "Cole," she said. He turned to look at her, and for a moment he was very still. "Did you pick those?" she asked. A short silence. "I thought the porch needed color," he said. She looked at him for a moment, this quiet, careful, undemonstrative man who had picked wildflowers from a creek bed and walked the long way into town with them, and then given them to a landlady to put out so he wouldn't have to hand them to her directly. "They are very nice flowers," she said. Something in his face shifted, and he nodded. "Good," he said. That was all either of them said about it. But when she went inside an hour later, she was smiling in the dark stairwell in a way that she was glad no one could see. There were practical difficulties, as there always are. Nora had a life she had built carefully, a purpose she had come to this hard country to fulfill. She did not have a history of allowing emotion to reorganize her plans, and she was not entirely sure she was prepared to start. Cole, for his part, had spent 11 years not landing anywhere, and that kind of life leaves marks on a person, patterns of thinking that are hard to revise. Neither of them was the kind who rushed. But the days moved forward the way days do, and the thing between them accumulated like the slow rising of river water after a spring rain, steady and inevitable and capable of changing the landscape entirely if you weren't watching. May came in with heat and the smell of dust, and the particular frantic quality that comes to every living thing in Texas spring, the sense that growth is happening faster than can be tracked. The Garza baby was thriving. Old Mrs. Carraway's rheumatism was manageable with the new preparation Nora had worked out. The letter to San Antonio had been received and acknowledged, and 2 men from the land office had been through Dusthaven the previous week, speaking to people quietly and taking notes. Hector Vane had been notably still through all of this. Publicly, he had made no response to the investigation. Privately, Nora was not foolish enough to believe his calm was genuine. On a Saturday evening in the second week of May, Nora was coming back late from a farm call 7 miles out, where she had sat for 4 hours with a man who was dying of something in his lungs that she did not have the means to stop, only the means to ease. She had held his wife's hand for a while after and listened, because sometimes that was all the medicine there was. She was tired in the way that goes below the body, the tiredness of having been fully present with something enormous and not being able to fix it. She was riding back on the road that came in from the east, which went along the back edge of Vane's property before turning into the main street. She saw the 3 men before they saw her, because she was coming out of a stand of scrub oak and they were in the road ahead, facing the other way. She pulled her horse up quietly. She did not know the men. They were not from Dusthaven, or at least they were not among the regular faces she had come to know. 2 were on horses. 1 was on foot, doing something to the road, and when she looked more carefully she could see that he was placing something, a length of wire stretched between 2 fence posts in a way that was clearly intended to bring down a horse at speed. She understood immediately what this was. She turned her horse very carefully back into the scrub oak and went around, taking the long way into town, her heart beating faster but her hands steady on the reins. She came in through the northern approach, tied her horse at the boarding house, and went looking for Cole. She found him at the smithy, which was closed and dark, and then at the boarding house dining room, and then, with a surge of relief that surprised her with its intensity, on the front porch. She sat down and told him what she had seen, quickly and precisely, with no more alarm in her voice than the situation required and no less. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You rode around it." "Obviously," she said. "Good," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "You need to tell the sheriff." The sheriff is afraid of Vane. Tell him anyway. Make it a formal report. If something happens and there's a record of it, it becomes harder to ignore." "You think Vane ordered it," she said. "I think the timing is interesting," he said carefully. "The land office men were here last week. Vane got quiet right after." She pressed her hands together in her lap. "The night was very warm and very full of cricket sound." "I am not going to stop," she said. "I know that," Cole said. "I wouldn't ask you to." She looked at him. "You could leave," she said. "This isn't your fight." He looked back at her. "I told you in the saloon, she speaks for me too." A pause. "That doesn't change because things get difficult." She held his gaze for a moment and felt something settle in her that had been quietly unsettled for weeks. "Cole," she said. "Nora," he said. "I would very much like to have dinner with you tomorrow," she said. "Not as patients or neighbors or whatever we have been, as dinner." He held her gaze for 3 full seconds and then he smiled, the full, warming smile she had only seen a handful of times. "I know a better restaurant than the corner place," he said. 3 towns over. A man I worked for once told me they do a proper roast that takes half a day to prepare." 3 towns over is quite a distance for dinner," she said. "Is that too far?" "No," she said, "that's not too far at all." They reported the wire to the sheriff that night, and Cole went with Nora to do it, standing slightly behind her with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that was very still and communicated quite a lot without words. The sheriff, a man named Pearl who had the permanently startled look of someone who had wanted a quieter life, wrote down what Nora said in his ledger and cleared his throat several times and said he would look into it. In the morning, the wire was gone from the road. Whoever had placed it had retrieved it in the night. But the report sat in Pearl's ledger, and Nora had written her own account of it and added it to the packet of documents she was compiling for the land office. The drive to Hairston, the town 3 over, took 2 hours in Cole's borrowed wagon, along a road that ran through low hills and scattered live oak in the early morning light. They talked the whole way, which Nora noted was unusual for her. She was not by nature a constant talker. But conversation with Cole had the quality of breathing, natural and unforced, and she found that she did not have to perform or manage herself in it. He had a dry humor she appreciated, the kind that arrived without announcement and was gone before you could quite catch it. She told him about a patient who had come in convinced he had been poisoned by a neighbor's cooking and had turned out to have eaten too many green apricots, and Cole laughed with his whole chest, and the sound of it went out across the quiet hills. The restaurant in Hairston was in a stone building that had been a trading post 20 years before, and the roast was exactly what had been promised, slow and rich, and accompanied by bread that was still warm from the oven. They sat for 3 hours, and outside the light shifted from morning to afternoon and back toward evening. He told her over coffee that he had been thinking about staying in Dusthaven beyond the summer. She looked at him over her cup. "What would you do?" "The blacksmith has talked about selling the shop," he said. "His health is not what it was. He's been doing it for 30 years and he's tired. The price is within reach if I sold what I have and took a small loan." "You could run a blacksmith shop," she said. "Not as a question. I know the work," he said. "Better every day, and it's steady. It's the kind of work a town always needs." She was quiet for a moment. "You would stay," she said, "here, in Dusthaven." He looked at her with those dark, quiet eyes. "That is what I am saying, yes." She was aware of the full weight of what he was saying and what he was not quite saying. She set her cup down carefully. "I should tell you," she said, "that I do not make easy decisions. I think carefully about things. I take a long time." "I know that," he said, "and I am not going to leave Dusthaven," she said, "or my work, not for anything." "I would not want you to," he said. "Some men say that and mean something different," she said. "I know that too," he said. "I mean it plainly." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the morning in the saloon when she had stood alone in front of Hector Vane and heard his voice behind her. She thought about the wildflowers on the porch railing that had been from the creek bed. She thought about the way he listened, the full, careful listening, as though what she said was worth every bit of his attention. "I believe you," she said. He nodded. Something in his shoulders settled, and she understood that he had been holding himself carefully for the answer. "Good," he said, "just that, good." But the way he said it. The drive back to Dusthaven was in the beginning of evening, with the sky going pink and orange over the hills and the air finally cool enough to breathe without effort. They sat close on the wagon bench, not quite touching, but close enough that she was aware of every inch of distance between his arm and hers. Somewhere around the halfway point, the wagon jolted on a stone and her shoulder pressed briefly against his, and neither of them moved away. They came into Dusthaven as the lamps were being lit along the main street, the yellow light spilling from windows across the dirt road. He stopped the wagon in front of the boarding house and climbed down first and offered her his hand, which she took, and when she was standing on the ground he did not let go right away and she did not pull away. They stood like that for a moment in the lamplight. "Nora," he said. "Yes," she said. "Would it be all right if I kissed you?" He said it very simply, in that direct, unhurried way he had of saying things as though the question were straightforward rather than enormous. "Yes," she said, "it would." He leaned forward and kissed her gently, one hand still holding hers and the other very lightly at her jaw, and it was brief and warm and nothing like what she had expected, and exactly what she had expected at the same time. When he pulled back, she was looking at him in the lamplight, and his face was open and warm in the way she had only seen a few times before. "All right," she said, a little breathlessly, and felt completely ridiculous about the breathless part. "All right," he agreed, and he was trying very hard not to smile too broadly. She went inside and stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand on the banister, and her heart doing something she had not felt since she was 17 and completely unprepared for it. Then she went upstairs and sat on her bed and thought about nothing practical at all for 20 full minutes, which was an absolute record. The summer unfolded like a long, warm letter. Cole bought the blacksmith shop in July, with money he had saved over 11 years and a modest loan from the bank in Harriston, because he would not touch Vane's bank, and the blacksmith, whose name was Ernie Holt, shook his hand and looked at him with the expression of a man passing on something he loved to someone he trusted. Cole worked the shop 6 days a week and learned the edges of it that he hadn't learned as an apprentice, the business side, the customer relationships, the particular satisfaction of running something that was his. On Sundays, he drove Nora to the Garza farm for her weekly check on Eduardo, who was by now rosy and loud and absolutely healthy, pulling himself up on the furniture and eyeing the world with the specific confidence of a baby who has survived something hard and come out of it ready for everything else. Miguel and Rosa received Cole warmly, because word had traveled about his appearance in the saloon, and Rosa made him a hatband from braided leather that he wore faithfully. On summer evenings, Cole and Nora walked along the river, where the cottonwoods made green shade and the water was low but still cool. She taught him the names of the native plants she had been learning, the ones with medicinal properties, the ones to avoid. He taught her things about cattle and land, and weather that she had no previous knowledge of and found unexpectedly interesting. They argued sometimes, mildly and with great enjoyment, about questions that had no answer, and agreed on the things that mattered. He kissed her in the shade of the cottonwoods on a still evening in late July when the fireflies were just beginning, and the heat had finally softened, and this time neither of them was particularly brief about it. "I have been thinking," he said when they came up for air, his forehead against hers and both of them a little unsteady in the best possible way. "Have you?" she said. "I know you take a long time with decisions," he said. "I know you are methodical and careful, and I respect that completely." "But," she said, "but I love you," he said, "methodically and carefully and completely, and I thought you should know." Nora was quiet for a moment. The fireflies flickered in the grass along the bank. The river moved past them in the dark, indifferent and ancient. "Cole," she said. "Yes. I love you too," she said. "I have been thinking it for quite a long time, and I wanted to be sure before I said it." "And you're sure?" he said. "I am absolutely sure," she said. He pulled her close and held her there in the cottonwood shade with his chin against her hair and her hands against his chest, and it felt like arriving somewhere after a very long road, which, for both of them, it was. The formal investigation from the San Antonio Land Office concluded in late August, with a written finding that Hector Vane had been operating his lending practices outside the agreed terms of his banking charter, which was a polite way of saying that he had been defrauding his customers. The finding recommended restitution to affected parties and a formal review of his banking charter, which was essentially a revocation in polite language. Vane did not fight it. Nora suspected this was because the investigation had also turned up something she had not known about: connections between Vane's money and a series of land grabs in 2 other counties that carried far more serious legal weight than anything Dusthaven alone could have produced. He hired lawyers, accepted the restitution requirements, and withdrew to the Silver Spur Saloon in a state of cold, calculating quiet. He was diminished. Not gone, not harmless, but diminished. The 2 men who had worked for him most visibly drifted away over the following weeks, the way men do when the money gets uncertain and the cause no longer looks inevitable. The businesses he had controlled through fear began to operate with a slightly different energy, the cautious, careful exhale of people who have been holding their breath for a long time. The people of Dusthaven brought Nora things. This was how they expressed gratitude in a place where no one had much to spare. Mrs. Morales brought a handmade quilt in deep red and gold. The Bauer family brought a side of cured ham that lasted Nora and Edna through September. Various people brought vegetables, preserves, a hand-carved wooden box that one of the older farmers had made over 2 winters just for the pleasure of it. It embarrassed her and moved her in equal measure. Cole watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of a man who was not surprised but was deeply glad. On an evening in early September, with the first hint of coming autumn in the air, and the sun going down in layers of copper and rose over the flat land to the west, Cole came to the boarding house porch at his usual time. He was clean and dressed more carefully than usual, which Nora noted but did not comment on. He sat down in his chair and then, after a very short pause, got up from his chair and went down on one knee in the dust in front of her, which was not what she had expected. She sat up very straight. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small ring, a simple gold band with a single small stone in it, clear and pale, that caught the last of the evening light. "I know you take a long time with decisions," he said again, because it had become something between them, a gentle, affectionate shorthand. "And I know that your answer today doesn't have to be your final answer, but I am asking you to marry me, Nora Callahan, not because I think you need anything I have to offer, but because I want to be in the same life as you, for as long as there is to be in." Nora looked at him kneeling in the dust with the ring in his hand, and the setting sun turning everything golden behind him, and she thought about the woman who had ridden into this town 8 months ago with her trunk of books and her letter of recommendation, who had been perfectly prepared to live her life without a partner, because she had not met a person who made her feel that partnership was something other than compromise. "Yes," she said. "Cole Briggs, I will absolutely marry you." He put the ring on her finger and stood up, and she stood up too, and he held her face in both hands and kissed her in the gold evening light, while inside the boarding house Edna Marsh made an extremely undignified noise of delight that they could hear through the open window. They were married in October in the small church on Ash Street by a minister named Reverend Cord, who had a very long white beard and a habit of pausing for drama at the key moments of ceremony, which Nora found charming and Cole found slightly nerve-wracking. The church was full. All 400 souls of Dusthaven seemed to have fit themselves in somehow, or at least attempted it, with the overflow standing outside the open doors. Rosa Garza brought Eduardo, who fell asleep during the vows and had to be held upright by Miguel, and the sight of the baby sleeping peacefully through the ceremony made several women in the congregation cry in a way that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with the fact that he had been so sick 6 months ago, and here he was now, fat and asleep and completely fine. Edna Marsh cried openly and without apology throughout. Old Ernie Holt, the former blacksmith, sat in the second row and blew his nose into his handkerchief at regular intervals. Nora wore a dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her and cleaned with great care, a deep cream color that had gone golden with time. She carried a bunch of wildflowers from the creek bed, which she had picked herself that morning, because she understood the symbolism and appreciated it. Cole stood at the altar in a new suit that he had clearly been uncomfortable buying and was wearing with great seriousness, and when she came down the aisle and he saw her, his face did the thing it always did when he was feeling something too large for his usual stillness to contain. It opened up. It became young and warm and completely unguarded. She loved that face. She had loved it since the cottonwood trees in July, and before that, if she was being honest, back to the morning in the saloon when he had stood behind her and spoken 4 words that had changed the direction of everything. When Reverend Cord reached the part where he asked if she took this man, she looked at Cole and said, "I do," with such precision and conviction that the Reverend blinked and then smiled broadly. When they came out of the church into the clear October air, someone in the crowd had brought a fiddle and was already playing, and it was not the slow, sad music she had heard on the porch in spring. This was fast and bright and kicking up like a good horse ready to run. They danced in the street. This was not something Nora had planned or even thought about, but Cole took her hand and pulled her into the space between the crowd and the music, and she was not going to say no to that. She was not, it turned out, a bad dancer, and Cole was better than she would have expected from a man of his general deportment. And the crowd hollered and clapped, and Edna Marsh joined in the dancing herself, which was magnificent. The party went on until nearly midnight, and when they finally went in, Nora leaned against Cole's shoulder in the dim hallway of the boarding house and felt, completely and without reservation, like a person whose life had arrived exactly where it was meant to be. They took a brief trip to San Antonio for a week, which was as much as either of them felt comfortable being away from their respective responsibilities. Nora had arranged for a retired Army doctor named Sims who was living in Fort Stockton to cover her practice, and Cole had left the shop in the capable hands of a young man named Daniel who had been apprenticing with him since August. San Antonio was splendid. It had buildings and streets, and a river and history, and markets full of things that neither Dusthaven nor Harriston could imagine. Nora bought 3 new medical textbooks and a set of surgical instruments she had been wanting for months. Cole bought leather and good tools and stood for a long time in front of a horse that someone was trying to sell at a price he found interesting before deciding against it. They ate at a restaurant that had white tablecloths, which made both of them slightly formal in a way that also made them laugh. They came back to Dusthaven on a Tuesday morning in late October, arriving with the wagon loaded and the sun just past noon, and the town looked exactly as it always looked, dust-colored and sun-bleached and slightly too hot and entirely itself. Home. Nora went straight to her practice and found 3 patients waiting, which was normal. Cole went to the smithy and found Daniel had managed everything very competently, which was gratifying. In the evening they sat at the table in the small house they had rented 2 blocks from the boarding house, which they had begun to furnish with the practical seriousness of 2 people who take comfort seriously, and ate dinner and talked about their respective days. It was a very ordinary evening. It was the best kind of ordinary. The winter of 1882 to 1883 came in slowly, the way Texas winters did, more suggestion than declaration for a long time before it finally committed to cold. Nora's practice continued to grow. She had established by now a reputation that extended beyond Dusthaven into the surrounding farms and smaller settlements, and she was not uncommon in the field, being consulted by families who would otherwise have had no medical care within reasonable reach. Cole's blacksmith shop became the reliable center of its kind it had been under Ernie Holt's management, and he added horse training to his services, because he had always been better with horses than most people were, and the word got out quickly. Daniel proved to be a genuine apprentice, learning fast and caring about the work. Hector Vane settled into a diminished version of his former reign. His banking charter was restructured under new oversight requirements, which meant he could no longer operate with quite the same impunity. He kept the silver spur, sold one of the water wells to the town, and maintained a low, cold profile. He did not bother Nora again, not directly. She suspected he had decided she was more trouble than she was worth, which she found entirely satisfying. The people who had feared him began to breathe differently. It was a gradual thing, the way all real changes are, not a sudden reversal but a slow shift in the quality of daily life, conversations in the street that were less guarded, decisions made without the first thought being what Vane would think of it. The town was not transformed overnight, but it was better, and the direction of better was continuing. In December, Nora told Cole what she had been carefully not telling him for 2 weeks because she had wanted to be sure that she was going to have a baby. He was at the workbench in the kitchen, mending a piece of harness by lamplight, and he went very still when she said it, and then set down the harness and the tool and turned around fully to look at her. "When?" he said. "July, I think," she said. "Perhaps late June if my calculations are slightly off." He crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hands in his and looked at her face for a long, searching moment as though checking that this was real and true and not a thing he was misinterpreting. "Nora," he said. "Yes," she said. He pulled her into his arms and held her very gently, more gently than usual, which made her laugh because she was a perfectly healthy pregnant woman and did not need to be handled like something fragile, and she told him so, and he laughed too, the chest-deep laugh she loved, and held her slightly less carefully. "A baby," he said against her hair. "A baby," she confirmed. "Our baby." He pulled back to look at her again, and his face was the open, warm, completely unguarded face that she loved best of all his faces, the one that only appeared at moments of feeling too large for the usual containment. "I have never been so happy," he said, very simply. "I want you to know that." "I know that," she said. "I am too." The winter settled in around them and they were warm. The months of pregnancy moved at the speed that such months always do, which is both very fast and extremely slow depending on which part you were experiencing. Nora continued working almost to the end because she was a doctor and knew what she was capable of and trusted her own body's signals. Cole became gradually and systematically unable to let her carry anything, open jars, or reach things on high shelves, which she found endearing and occasionally maddening. Rosa Garza appeared one afternoon in March with a basket full of things for a new baby, little wrapped items in soft cloth, and a small carved wooden toy that Tomás had made for Eduardo and wanted to give the new baby as a gift, which made Nora have to sit down and compose herself for a moment. Eduardo himself toddled around the practice room picking up every item he could reach while his mother tried to stop him, and the whole scene was so wonderfully chaotic and alive that Nora felt tears on her face and was not entirely sure when they had started. Rosa saw them and held Nora's hand and said, very quietly, that she would never forget what Nora had done for her family. "You would have found a way," Nora said. "Maybe," Rosa said, "but you made the way appear when there was none." Nora shook her head. "A man named Cole Briggs helped with that too." Rosa smiled and said she knew and that she was very glad Nora had found him. "So am I," Nora said. "So am I." The baby came on a hot morning in late June, which was slightly earlier than Nora's most precise estimate and right on the edge of the less precise one, which meant her calculations had been nearly perfect, which she noted with professional satisfaction between contractions. It was a long labor and an honest one, and Cole was there for all of it, which surprised the midwife they had brought in but did not surprise Nora in the least. He held her hand for 12 hours and said very little but was entirely present, which was what she wanted. The baby was a boy. He came into the world as the morning heat was beginning to build, squalling and vigorous and unmistakably new, and Cole held him with the careful reverence of a man handling something he cannot believe is real. "What do we call him?" Cole asked very quietly, looking at the baby's face. "Samuel," Nora said after the doctor who had trained her. "Samuel James Briggs." Cole looked up at her. "James was my father's name." "I know," she said. He looked back at the baby and his jaw worked for a moment. "Samuel James," he said. "Good." Samuel James Briggs was healthy and loud, and from his first days in the world had a very specific opinion about everything, which he communicated with great conviction to anyone in the vicinity. He had Cole's dark hair and Nora's green eyes and a personality that belonged entirely to himself, which Nora recognized as the most accurate outcome. The summer of 1883 was full in a way that Dusthaven had not been before, or perhaps it was simply that Nora was paying attention to different things now. The way that the arrival of a new person in your life reorganizes everything around them without diminishing anything else. She was back at her practice by September, with Samuel in a basket in the corner of the examination room, which several patients found either charming or delightful or both. Cole built a rocking chair that winter for Samuel's room, a project that took him 3 months of Sunday afternoons and resulted in something both beautiful and solid, built to last a generation. Daniel, the apprentice, had by now become a genuine craftsman in his own right, and the shop had enough business between the two of them to grow. The land office investigation concluded fully in the spring of 1884, with a final finding that resulted in formal restitution payments to all affected families. The Garzas received enough to clear their debt entirely and have a small amount over, which Miguel put toward fencing the back pasture he had been wanting to fence for 3 years. The other affected families received similar proportions. Vane paid it all without any public statement, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Nora heard the news on a Tuesday afternoon and closed her practice early, which she almost never did, and walked to the smithy to tell Cole. He was at the forge and turned when she came in, reading her face. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He set down his work and came to her, and she leaned against him in the warm, metal-end fire smell of the smithy and felt the satisfaction of a long effort fully completed. "We should go see the Garzas," he said. "On Sunday," she agreed. They did. Rosa had made a meal of everything that was good from the spring garden and the cured meats of the winter, and Miguel had come out onto the road to meet them when he saw the wagon coming, which was more demonstration of feeling than he usually permitted himself. Eduardo, now nearly 3 years old, ran circles around everyone and tried to catch Samuel, who was just beginning to pull himself up on things and regarded Eduardo with the complicated respect of a baby confronted with a larger baby who knows how to run. They ate outside because the day was fine, and the shade of the one large oak beside the farmhouse was exactly wide enough. The afternoon went long and easy, with the children providing most of the entertainment and the adults letting them, sitting with their coffee and the particular pleasant exhaustion of people who have worked hard for something and are now briefly at rest. On the drive home, with Samuel asleep in the basket on the wagon floor and the evening light golden on the hills, Cole reached over and took Nora's hand where it rested on the seat between them. She turned her palm up and held his. "Do you remember," he said, "in the saloon when you first walked in?" "I remember everything about that morning," she said. "Were you afraid?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said, "not very." "But yes. You didn't look it," he said. "I have learned that fear and action are not mutually exclusive," she said. "You can be afraid and still move forward. The movement is what matters." He was quiet for a moment, watching the road. The horse moved at its own calm pace through the warm evening. "I was afraid too," he said. "Walking in behind you, saying what I said." She looked at him. "You didn't look it either." "I thought, whatever happens, she is not going to face it alone," he said. And that was enough to take the next step. She thought about the moment she had first heard his voice, the way the sound of it had reorganized the quality of the air in that room. the 4 words that had changed everything. "I am glad you followed me in," she said. "I will always follow you in," he said, "or walk beside you, whichever is needed." She squeezed his hand. "Both," she said. "Usually both." He smiled, and the road went on ahead of them, wide and clear in the evening light, with home at the end of it. The years in Dusthaven settled into their rhythms with the depth and reliability of something rooted. Seasons turned, and the town turned with them, growing slowly as settlements in that part of Texas were growing, new families arriving with the push of the railroad that was extending its reach further south every year. Nora's practice expanded to the point where she genuinely needed help, and in the autumn of 1885 she began training a young woman named Clara Finch, who had the same quality she had once had in Dr. Hart's practice, the specific combination of intelligence and steadiness that medicine required. Cole's shop grew too, adding a second forge and taking on a third hand, because the town's growth meant more horses, more machinery, more need for the things he made and maintained. Daniel had become a full partner by then, and they worked well together in the way of people who have learned each other's rhythms. Samuel, at 3 and then 4 and then 5, was a person. That was the only word for it. He was a very distinct, very opinionated person who was interested in everything and afraid of nothing, and who had inherited what Cole called his mother's chin, meaning the specific angle at which she held it when she had decided something. He went everywhere with them in turns, to the practice and to the smithy, and out to the farms on Sundays, accumulating a broad and practical education in the world's actual operations. Edna Marsh remained at the boarding house, where she was universally beloved, and she doted on Samuel with an energy that was slightly shocking given her age and demeanor. She taught him card games of questionable propriety, and fed him things that Nora had specifically not approved, and was entirely unrepentant about all of it. Old Ernie Holt spent his retirement in the pleasant occupation of coming by the smithy several times a week to tell Cole things he was already doing correctly, which Cole accepted with genuine affection. Ernie had no family nearby, and the shop was still his in the way that something you have made from nothing is always yours, even after the papers have changed hands. The Garza family thrived. Eduardo grew into a bright-eyed, energetic child who was clearly going to be a great deal of work for everyone who loved him, and Tomás became a serious, capable young man who was learning to run the farm as his father aged. Rosa had another child, a girl named Esperanza, in 1884, who was born healthy and easy and brought with her the particular rightness of a family that had come through something difficult and come through together. In the spring of 1886, Nora was pregnant again. She told Cole on the same evening she was sure, sitting across from him at the kitchen table in the lamplight, and his reaction was the same as before, the stillness and then the crossing of the room and the holding. "When?" he said again, because apparently that was always his first question, and she loved him for it, the practical groundedness of it. "November," she said. "Good," he said. "That's good." She pulled back to look at him. "You are very easy about this," she said. "You were easy about the first time, too." "Most men are more rattled." "I am rattled," he said. "I'm extremely rattled. But I'm also the man who married Nora Callahan, who walked into a saloon to take on the most feared man in the county, and I have learned that being rattled and being ready are not mutually exclusive either." She stared at him for a moment. "Are you quoting me back at me?" "I have been quoting you back to myself for 4 years," he said. "It's very useful." She laughed so suddenly and completely that Samuel, who was playing on the floor nearby, looked up with the startled expression of a 5-year-old who has heard his mother make a sound he did not know she could make. The second baby came in November, as calculated, on a cold and clear afternoon with the Pecos River low, and silver gray through the window of the bedroom where they had put the good oak bed Cole had made in the months after Samuel was born. This labor was shorter and kinder than the first, and the baby was a girl, dark-eyed and quiet, and looking from the first hours of her life, as though she was assessing everything with great care before making any judgments. They called her Eleanor Francis, Eleanor for no particular person, just because it suited her, and Francis for Nora's mother. Samuel regarded Eleanor with the complicated mixture of ownership and confusion common to older siblings, before settling into a dedicated protectiveness that showed itself in small, serious ways, bringing her things, telling adults who got too close to please be careful, explaining to her with great patience the workings of horses, cooking, and the night sky, to all of which Eleanor responded with the serene indifference of a baby who has her own timeline. The winter passed and the spring came again, and Dusthaven was alive in it, the way living things always are after cold. Nora walked her rounds in the mornings with the new energy of someone who has managed a difficult winter with a new baby and survived it well. Cole opened the smithy each morning in the particular clear air of a Texas spring and felt, each time, the satisfaction of a man who has found the thing he is for. Hector Vane, in the end, did not leave Dusthaven. He remained there in the Silver Spur, much reduced in power and correspondingly reduced in presence, becoming over the years simply a part of the town's furniture, a man who had once been feared and was now simply old. People were not particularly unkind to him, and not particularly kind either. He existed in the town the way a scar exists on a healed wound, present, a record of something that happened, but no longer the thing itself. The town grew. The railroad spur came through in 1887 and brought with it the acceleration that railroads always brought: new people, new business, new argument about what kind of place Dusthaven was going to be. Nora became involved in the arguments about the latter in the direct, clear-eyed way she became involved in everything: attending town meetings, writing letters, applying the same logic she had applied in the Silver Spur to the question of what a community owed its members and what its members owed each other. Cole came to the town meetings and said little but listened carefully and voted with Nora every time, not because he deferred to her, but because he had thought it through himself and consistently arrived at the same place, which she had pointed out was statistically unlikely if they had not genuinely understood each other, and he had agreed and found it very pleasant. Samuel started school in 1887, walking there every morning with his schoolbook under his arm and the specific serious expression of a child who is going to take this seriously, and coming home every afternoon with a completely different expression: the loosened, wind-burned face of a child who has been outside for the last 2 hours because the teacher, a sensible man named Mr. Adler, understood that boys of 6 needed to move. Eleanor followed him everywhere he went that was permitted to her, and a few places that weren't, and Nora recognized in her younger daughter something that had some of her own quality in it: the decision already formed before the permission was asked, the readiness to state a case and hold to it. She mentioned this to Cole one evening. "I know," he said. "I saw it in her the week she was born." "Is that alarming to you?" she asked. He looked at her with a great deal of feeling in his quiet, dark eyes. "It is the best possible thing," he said. "I have been in love with that quality since October of 1882. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Cole Briggs," she said. "Nora Briggs," he said. "I am very glad you followed me into that saloon." "So am I," he said, "every single day." Outside the window, the town of Dusthaven went about its evening, the lamps coming on in windows, the sound of people calling to each other across the fading light, the distant bark of a dog, the long cry of a bird somewhere near the river. It was a sound she had come to know completely, the particular music of this place that had been a strange town and had become her life. Inside, at the kitchen table, the two of them sat in the lamplight with the children asleep upstairs, and the years spread behind them like a road that had led, through all its strange and difficult and beautiful passages, to exactly here. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been when she rode into Dusthaven, alone with her trunk and her letter and her certainty that she had something to contribute. She had been right about all of it. She had contributed. She had changed things. She had not done it alone, but she had not been alone, and that distinction was the whole of the difference. She had stood up in a room full of fear and said what was true and needed saying. And a man she had barely spoken to had stood behind her and said 4 words that she had been turning over in her heart for 5 years now, finding new angles in them every time. She speaks for me too, not because she needed defending, not because he had anything to prove, because he had seen her clearly, completely from the first, and what he had seen had been worth standing behind. That was what love was, she had decided, not the grand declaration or the rescued maiden or the fairy story. It was a person who saw you as you were, in the full difficulty and capability and particularity of your actual self, and chose to stand in that same direction. She looked at Cole across the table, at the lines that years and weather and laughter had begun to draw on his face, at the familiar hands that could shoe a horse or hold a newborn or find hers in the dark without looking. "I love you," she said. He looked up from the book he was reading, the half-reading he did in the evenings where he was present more than absorbed. "I love you," he said, as easily and certainly as breathing. Samuel called from upstairs, something about Elena having taken something of his, which was a regular event. They looked at each other and both, simultaneously, began to rise. "I'll go," Cole said. "We both go," she said, which was also regular. They went upstairs together, into the warm, noisy, specific life they had built in this sun-bleached, river-edged, improbable town at the edge of everything, and it was enough. It was, in fact, exactly and entirely everything. The years continued on. Elena learned to argue her case with precision from her mother, and to listen to the other person's argument before deciding she was still right, which was a skill Cole modeled for her without knowing he was teaching it. Samuel, at 12, had the solemn, capable quality of a young man who would grow into someone trustworthy and useful, which Nora thought about often with the particular fierce quiet of a mother who cannot say it out loud without embarrassing him. Clara Finch, Nora's trainee, completed her training and took on a portion of the practice independently, which allowed Nora to do something she had not done in years: rest, occasionally on purpose. She used the time to begin writing a medical reference guide for practitioners working in isolated frontier conditions, the kind of book she had wished she had when she first arrived in Dusthaven. She wrote it at the kitchen table in the evenings after the children were in bed and Cole was reading, in the lamplight and the quiet, and it grew slowly and honestly over 3 years into something she sent to a printer in San Antonio, with a feeling of completion that was different from but equal to the feeling of saving a particular life. Cole expanded the smithy one more time, adding a wing for carriage repair that Daniel managed with the confidence of someone who has grown entirely into himself in a good place. Ernie Holt came to the opening of the new wing with a gait that was slower than it used to be but a face that was perfectly pleased, and he shook Cole's hand at the door and said, without preamble, that he had made the right choice. Cole looked at the older man and then at the shop and then, briefly, at the sky. "I know it," he said. The town of Dusthaven in 1890 was a different place than it had been in 1882, not unrecognizably so, not transformed into something smooth and easy, because frontier towns are not smooth or easy, and the pretending otherwise was always a lie. But there was a difference in it, in the way people moved through it, the way they talked in the street, the way they settled disputes and looked after each other's children and showed up when something went wrong for a neighbor. Some of that difference had causes that could not be easily named. Some of it had causes that were very clear. On a morning in late 1890, Nora stood in the street outside the practice and watched the town go by, the wagon traffic and the horses and the children running on errands and the people who had become, over 8 years, entirely familiar to her. Mrs. Garza, grown stout and joyful, passing with the market basket. Daniel at the smithy door looking up from something and waving. Edna Marsh on the boarding house porch knitting with the contentment of someone who has exactly the life they wanted. Cole came up beside her. He had come from the smithy and had the characteristic smell of it, metal and fire and good honest work. "You look like you're taking inventory," he said. "In a way," she said. He stood beside her and they both looked at the street. Satisfied with the count, he said. She thought about it. About every face she knew, and every story she was part of, and every child who had been born in her practice, and every person who had walked out of a fear they had lived inside for years. "Yes," she said, "entirely." He took her hand there in the street in the full public morning, and they stood in the warm, bright, ordinary day of a life that had been earned completely and was being lived all the way through. "Come on," he said. "Clara can manage the morning. Let's walk to the river." She looked up at him, this man who had followed her into a room full of fear and never once in all the years since walked away. "Yes," she said. "Let's." They walked down the main street of Dusthaven, Texas, hand in hand in the October morning of 1890, past the smithy and the boarding house and the saloon and the bank and all the buildings that held the living record of their years, and down the road to the Pecos, where the cottonwoods were going gold at the edges, and the water moved cool and clear over its stones. They stood there for a long time, not needing to say anything. The river went on the way rivers do, past and present and future all at once, carrying everything and caring for nothing and being, despite all of that, profoundly beautiful. Nora leaned against Cole's shoulder. He put his arm around her. The cottonwoods rustled in a wind that came from somewhere far to the north and smelled of the changing season. Everything that needed saying had been said. Everything that needed doing had been done and was still, joyfully, being done. The story of how it had started. A woman walking into a room with her chin up and a letter in her pocket and a truth that needed speaking. And a quiet man standing up behind her with 4 words that were also the truest thing he had ever said. That story had grown into something larger and deeper and more permanent than either of them could have imagined standing on the plank sidewalk in the hard spring light of 1882. But that was how the best things always went. They started with a moment of choosing, with a voice that said, plainly and without reservation, that what was right was right. And then everything else grew from there, in the stubborn, generous, irrepressible way that everything alive will grow when it has good soil and is tended by people who mean it. They walked back to town in the warm morning. There was work to be done, and children to be collected after school, and neighbors to check on, and all the 1,000 ordinary things that make up a life that is worth the living. They walked back to all of it together, and they were glad.